Hello, my name is Logan Williams, and in this presentation, I will be discussing due process models. What is a due process model? Britannica defines due process as a course of legal proceedings according to rules and principles that have been established in a system of jurisprudence for the enforcement and protection of private rights. In each case, due process contemplates an exercise of the powers of government as the law permits and sanctions under recognized safeguards for the protection of individual rights. A due process model, however, is a type of justice system which is based on the principle that a citizen has some absolute rights and cannot be deprived of life, liberty, or property without appropriate legal procedures and safeguards. There are two components to the due process model: procedural due process and substantive due process. Most modern due process cases deal with what is called procedural due process. Due process procedures do not guarantee that the result of government action will be in the accused's favor. However, due process procedures do help prevent unreasonable decisions. Substantive due process refers to the Supreme Court's examination of the reasons why the government passed a law or otherwise acted in a manner denying a citizen or a group of citizens life, liberty, or property. In some cases, such as when a law infringes upon a citizen's First Amendment rights, right to privacy, right to vote, or makes a sexual or racial classification, the Supreme Court requires the government to have an extremely important reason for the law. The court will strictly scrutinize the government's reasons and likely will strike the law down. In other cases, such as when the government enacts taxation or zoning laws, the personal rights involved are not as fundamental, and the court will uphold the law as long as the government's motives are not arbitrary or irrational. Due process requirements vary depending on the situation. Due process provides citizens who will be affected by a government decision a right to give notice of what the government plans to do and have a chance to comment on that action. In addition to notice and opportunity to be heard, due process includes a hearing before an impartial person, representation by an attorney, calling witnesses on one's behalf, cross-examination of witnesses, a written decision with reasons based on evidence introduced, a transcript of the proceeding, and an opportunity to appeal the decision. In 1215, King John of England promised that, quote, "No free man shall be taken or imprisoned, or deceased or exiled, or in any way destroyed, nor will we go upon him nor send upon him, except by the lawful judgment of his peers or by the law of the land." End quote. The Magna Carta laid the foundation for individual rights and is now a cornerstone of American justice. Our founding fathers framed our nation's Constitution with this very principle in mind. Due process can be found twice within the Bill of Rights, which is arguably the most important piece of the United States Constitution. The Fifth Amendment reads, "No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime, unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia, when in actual service in time of war or public danger. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation." The 14th Amendment reads, "All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws." Due process can even be found inside state constitutions. For example, Section 18 of the New Mexico Constitution reads, "No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall any person be denied equal protection of the laws. Equality of rights under law shall not be denied on account of the sex of any person." The due process model, as mentioned earlier, is fundamental in the preservation of citizens' individual rights, yet it must remain balanced against the need to enforce laws and maintain social order. Law without order is anarchy, but order without law is tyranny. The balance between law and order swings back and forth between two values: the protection of rights and preservation of law. Concern for due process swung to its most liberal point in the 1960s. For example, in 1967, in Re Gault, a Supreme Court decision, the higher court ruled that the due process applies to juveniles in the same manner as adults. The balance then swung back to the right again with the Law and Order platform on which Richard Nixon ran his presidential campaign. With mass social unrest, crime control was largely supported in communities. Safety, swift and preferably harsh justice for the offender being the core of community support. The emphasis on efficient and effective justice is known as the crime control model. Since the slaughterhouse cases of 1873, the Supreme Court has held that the Due Process Clause incorporates many, but not all, of the individual protections of the Bill of Rights against the states. Not incorporated means that only federal government is required to abide by these protections. Since then, almost all of the Bill of Rights protections has been state incorporated, meaning the states must also abide by these protections. The exceptions to incorporation include the Third Amendment's quartering restriction, the Fifth Amendment's right to a grand jury trial, the Seventh Amendment's right to a jury trial in a civil case, and the Eighth Amendment's prohibition on excessive fines. Remember, these are protections that are exceptions to state incorporation but remain federally protected. In many Arab countries, rights seem to be bestowed upon citizens at random. One thing Arabian and American systems do have in common is the presumption of innocence. However, non-wealthy Arabs have little to no expectation of being granted due process rights, much less having them protected from the government. In England, for example, despite having a similar justice system as the United States, public defenders are not granted to those who cannot afford one. In Saudi Arabia, legal representation is not permitted whatsoever in a criminal case. Despite these disparities and a few religious outliers, thanks to democratization, the rights of accused persons is starting to become a vital implementation into legal systems. One can only hope for a world where no citizen, regardless of race, religion, or gender, will be subject to the deprivation of their life, liberty, or property without due process.